Shalom, this is Avraham Shira. Welcome to our Erev Shabbat talk. Today we're going to talk about Shabbat, above time and space, the nature of miracles, the nature of time and its relation to memory and miracles. We begin with the first one of the commands of Shabbat, Zachor et Yom HaShabbat HaKadeshehu. Zachor, remember the Shabbat to sanctify it. Of course, this essentially means that I remember, today's Shabbat, and I sanctify it by making Kiddush on a glass of wine, making bread, breaking bread, etc., the basic mitzvot of Shabbat. But is it really just that? Zachor et Yom HaShabbat. The hey before the word Shabbat is a signifier in Hebrew grammar. It's the Shabbat, meaning which Shabbat, a specific Shabbat. Is it just this week's Shabbat? No. The Zohar teaches us that all Shabbats are connected to the first Shabbat. The first Shabbat, where Adam and Eve, the first humans that had divine speech, their first day, complete day, was a Shabbat. They were born on Friday, they didn't have a full day, and then they went straight into Shabbat. So clearly we're operating at another whole level of reality. They're born as adults. They're not children. They don't grow up like other people. They don't have normal parents like other people. Well, I don't know anybody who has normal parents, but that's a generational issue. But the first couple, Adam and Eve, found themselves in a non-physical plane called the Garden of Eden. They didn't have bodies. They didn't have materiality the way we have it. Their perception was a rarefied, purified perception of reality that we can only imagine when we think about the Garden of Eden, because that's really where they began. Okay, and that Zachor et Yom HaShabbat, that first day, connects us to that Shabbat through every Shabbat. So every Shabbat is an extraction of that original place and time in space. Now they weren't really in space then, because there was no space in the original Garden of Eden. And they weren't in time because there was no sun and moon to delineate time. And of course, soul they had. But soul, we have to understand, your intention is your soul. You are what you want any time that you want it. Who are you? What you're wanting at any given time. If you want something good, you're a good human being. If you want something bad, at that moment, you're acting not good. You're acting bad. So we are our intentionality at any given time and place. Now, of course, we live in a continuum of time, whereas we say the past is gone and the future is not, and the present is a split second, kacheref ayin, like the blink of an eye. So where are we? If we're constantly in this shift between the past, the present, and the future, we're always on the move. So our true self is what we're wanting at any given time. So when the Torah tells us, Zachor to Shabbat, it's telling us, I want you to remember Shabbat. Well, I'm doing it. I'm getting dressed. I'm buying stuff for Shabbat. I'm going to synagogue on Shabbat. We're having a special meal. We're having guests. It's all wonderful. But is the doing it the Shabbat? It's part of it, but it's the wanting it. In the case of Shabbat, it's the wanting that first Shabbat, to wanting to be with the Shabbat itself, not with the externalities of Shabbat. The externalities are beautiful. You have cholent on the grill, and you have the baked goods, and you have wine and all kinds of wonderful things. But that's all the external aspect of Shabbat. I want the thing itself. The real Shabbat, that sense of inner universal rest, of peace with all reality, and the vision of that peace within, without. And so I'm not turning to CNN for that peace, you know what I mean? Not going to happen. And I'm not going to even turn to my personal relationships. Maybe I have peace with all my friends and my family. Still, the peace has to start inside, with myself, with who I am and who I'm not. So part of connecting to the real first Shabbat is dropping some of the things that I am not. Okay, we're going to get to this point in just a moment. But so we're at this level now. I want to rephrase that first sentence of the Torah, Zachor et Yom Shabbat l'kadeshehu. Zachor, to remember, can also be translated as Zecher. Memory is Shabbat. That the idea of memory is an action where a human being accesses above time and space. Because when you go to a memory, you're going to a thought that's somewhere else. It's in your mind, it's in your memory, but it's not in your present reality. Now the Baal Shem Tov taught us that you are where your thoughts are. So if my thoughts are on the fact that I'm right now sitting here in my office giving a class, that's where I am. But if my thoughts are on the first Shabbat, for example, or let's say my thoughts are on the first day I went to elementary school, or the first time I I went to college, or et cetera, I'm there. Now, I might not experience it because my filters are not very clear. But the clearer our filters get, the easier I access the purity of my memories. Okay, that's a line that we need to repeat. The purer my filter, the easier I access the essence of my memory. Now, Rabbi Nachman says memory is above time and space. Why? Why is memory above time and space? Because it doesn't degrade. Because everything attached to the physical world degrades. The mountains crumble. With enough time and space and a few earthquakes thrown in, the mountain will crumble. The rivers will dry up. Our bodies, well, we don't have to talk about that too much, what happens to our bodies over time. Physicality degrades. That's the nature of the physical realm. The spiritual realm does not degrade. How do you know this? Because if you think about the first memory that you have, I remember being in a graveyard when my great-grandfather was buried. I was less than 1 year old. But I remember being there. How? I don't know how, but the thought's in my head. That means that that event is still existent in the theater called my mind. So it's still alive. Now, the graveyard still might be there, and I don't know what's down there in the earth, but I do know that when you experience a memory, you're in the memory. You're in that movie again. And the movie is still here, so it hasn't degraded. The experience is still recorded in your memory. You're living that recording. Now, what the rabbi is teaching us is that the memory, that recording of your experience, is above time and space because it doesn't degrade. Now, let's take it multi-generationally. If I pass that memory to my son, and it's alive in his brain, now it's Abba's memory, it's still in his mind and it's still awake. It's still there. Now, let's take that idea and turn it backwards. I remember Shabbat because some rabbi taught me about Shabbat. And I had my first Shabbat at my sister's house, and et cetera, et cetera. And they got it from their rabbi, and that rabbi got it from his rabbi, and from his mother, and from his father, all the way back generationally to the first Shabbat. Because even though the Jews were given the Torah at Mount Sinai and the command to keep Shabbat, the concept of Shabbat, it was existent in the first man's mind, the first woman's consciousness and experience. There was the idea of resting once a week. Now, how you kept it and all the trappings and what tablecloth you used, I don't know back then. But they still had this concept of 1 day a week is sanctified to Hashem, to prayer, meditation, celebration, song, dance, praise. Some pretty basic ideas for human existence. So when I'm remembering Shabbat, I'm going back along this chain of time all the way to the beginning. You might say, well, that's very nice, Avraham. It's 6,000 years almost since that first Shabbat. I don't feel much of it. Well, I understand that, but there's a way that we can. There's a way that we can. How? Well, I'll tell you how. We have to remember what it's like not to be who we think we are. I have to remember what it's like before I was who I am today. I have to go back in time in my own life. I was once a 19-year-old. I was once a 9-year-old. I was once 9 months old and born from my mother. And as I go back in time, I'm erasing layers of self, right? And so I can remember, wait a second, what I really am is a piece of the divinity of God. I'm a soul created from God's oversoul called the first man. The first man contained all souls, and then each generation was born as a layer of divine power coming out of that man. So it starts at the head, the beginning of time is at the head, the end of time is at the bottom of the feet, and each generation is a layer of soul. Okay, so we are from that original structure. It's like in a bee, a queen bee gives birth, and she gives birth to thousands of bees at once. Little tiny bees, right? They're all together in a pod, right? All of humanity was a pod in the first man. And then over time, each generation, another layer was born. Okay, so we're going back to the beginning of the beginning. So I have to remember some things, that my soul is above time. Therefore, I'm really not from time. And I'm really not from space. And I'm really not a 59-year-old guy. And I'm not really in this land mass called Eretz Israel. And I'm not really a student of the Torah for 26 years in this yeshiva. And I'm not really a therapist for 20 years, etc., etc. And I'm stripping away layers of self-identity as I go. And this house that I live in is, well, the government might say it's mine, but that could change very easily, right? And the car I drive is, well, is that mine? It's a car, it's gonna fall apart. It could be a few weeks. You never know about these things, right? And so on and so forth. The debts that I have, the assets that I have, it's all external. It's not really us. And as I strip away, I'm not this, and I'm not the guy who gets angry at my kids, and I'm not the guy who gets, disappointed in people, etc. These are all external layers of self. When you take it down to that level of purity, you become a spark of the living Creator. And the spark of the living Creator wants to do one thing. One thing. It's very simple. What the Creator wants. Because we're part of Him. So when I'm stripping these external layers, I'm going back in time. Because all of these garments, they're called in Kabbalah, these garments that we put on are just time bound. I don't wear the clothes I wore in high school, right? And I don't think the thoughts that I thought in high school either. And I don't look at the world the way I looked at the world then. So these are all still garments. Even your thoughts are layered like garments. Okay? And so as we strip them away, we're going back in time. And once we arrive at that pure essence of who we really are, and then I understand that I am a spark of the Creator, then when I plug into the mind Shabbat, I plug into the first Shabbat. Before all the other Shabbats I kept and all the other Shabbats I didn't keep, etc., etc., I'm going backwards in time through the memory of the true self. The true self that was part of Adam that first day in creation when the first Shabbat happened in reality. Now, it was above time and space reality, and we're still pulling Shabbat into reality every week when we keep it. Now, we go back to this statement of the Baal Shem Tov, I am where my thoughts are. Again, now, if my thoughts are all full of, stuff, and I don't have a very pure consciousness, that I'm going to have a hard time accessing the purity of the past, that purity of memory. But when your heart is pure, you can remember things that you never knew you knew. Things that were even from a previous lifetime. Now, the Book of Reincarnation has been dealing with this for hundreds and even thousands of years on an oral tradition. But if you go into even post-quantum physics and some of the books that have been written by some of the physicists in our generation about time and memory, they will tell you the same thing, that memory itself is a vehicle of time. It's not simply a recording in your brain, because that memory that you have is from a time above time, again. So, and if you read books from psychics, they'll tell you the same thing. And if you read psychology, they'll tell you the same thing, that our memories are encoded with the past. How? Through images. And sometimes it's through noises, and sometimes sound, and sometimes it's through smell. But that encoding transcends the breakdown of the physical body, and it's passed on. And you guess what? If a person leaves this world and they still have stuff to fix and they have to come back again, they will come back with that encoding. And that's what it means to come back to fix something that I did in a previous generation. Because I'm still carrying the wound or the pain of something I did or that was done to me that I need to fix. And so if you look at soul as it's a piece of memory that keeps traveling from body to body to body to body. And the book of reincarnation tells us an outrageous thing, that you can come back 1,000 times. Well, that's a little scary. You get lost over there, right? I had 1,000 different selves. I had 1,000 different lives. Well, open up Edgar Cayce. He writes about it, and he's not a religious Jew. He was a devout Christian, but he was one of the greatest psychics of the 20th century. 14,000 recorded meetings that he had, and he tells you the same thing. And just because I'm Jewish, I look to older sources, and they're writing very similar things. So when you start to see the truth appear in different sources, you start to take notice with a little more respect for the traditions that came to us. Okay? And I don't, to begin with, tell people, oh, go out and learn this, go out and learn that. I say, let's start. If you're a Jew, start with the Jewish source. If you're a non-Jew, you can start with the Jewish source or not. But what I do see is that when you have a memory, you are traveling in time. And it just depends on the purity of my mind to experience the travel. I don't experience it as going somewhere else, like the Baal Shem Tov says. But if you're on the level of a tzaddik ador or a hidden tzaddik or someone who's really righteous and really pure, then you will travel in your thoughts. And then you can understand what's called remote vision. Now, remote vision, like the CIA knows about this stuff, the KGB has been practicing and teaching psychics for 50 years. When I first read about that, I wept. I can't believe it. I said the CIA and the KGB, some of the most righteous guys in the world, right? They have the secrets of the Kabbalah that we didn't even know about. Weren't taught. They didn't teach us that in Sunday school, you know. But remote vision is that. They're accessing a memory bank above themselves because of their mind and their gift of their soul they've been given, and they can see backward in time. So Shabbat, I'm not, the CIA wants this information because they want to manipulate and dominate. I want to connect to the first Shabbat because I want to bring God's presence into the world. It's a little different, right? Halavai, that the CIA wanted to bring God's presence in the world. They'd be a powerful force for good. But unfortunately, there's more politics in this world than in heaven. In heaven, there's no politics because because there's only truth. Falsehood will not stand. Anyways, we have to believe in ourselves. We have to believe in our connection to Hashem to access it. If I don't believe in it, I'm using a tiny little wire to connect to a giant generator. How much can I bring down my tiny little wire? But when your faith gets bigger, your wire gets bigger, your connection gets stronger, and then you can start to experience the first Shabbat, your first Shabbat. Just a memory of yourself as a pure child. What a beautiful thing if you could just remember what it was like to have never done anything wrong. If you can remember that, you're going to taste a piece of your pure, true self. what we call BS, before sin, right? So I want to bless all of us with this experience and to take the time on Shabbat to experience above time through your mind, because your mind has the access. It is the portal. And if my mind is a little clogged, a little gummed up, I need a little WD-40 in my ear, I don't know, whatever it takes. The main thing, of course, is we sanctify the day, we keep the basic mitzvahs of Shabbat, but we are focused. We know what we're doing. We're going in with an intention. And it's our intentionality that directs us. If I just go in, sababa, I'm sitting on the beach in my lawn chair, I'm not really thinking, focusing my mind on what's happening in the spiritual realm. And Shabbat is the revelation of the spiritual realm in this realm. All the mitzvot are tied to the mikdash, and the mikdash was the space above time. Okay, and the tzaddik, the Kohen Gadol, the chief high priest, he's the human being who's the channel that connects the two. So you have mikdash, Shabbat, and tzaddik. All three are bound together to channel this above time energy into time, above space power into space. And what we're doing is kind of like trying to work our way back up the escalator. So give yourself the time to really do this. The best way is alone, in a forest, by a spring, wherever you can really be, where no human energy is around you, except you and your creator. When we get around people, all of a sudden you get static. You get all kinds of psychic interference. And what we need is that purity of mindset to experience our true selves before all the garments of this world. So God bless all of you. Come look for us next week. We'll be around. We'll be teaching Rabbi Nachman every day on online, on YouTube, on Patreon, whatever platforms are out there. We're trying to reach you. So God bless you all. Shabbat Shalom.